Conan's next update, the Age of War Chapter 4, has mostly been dominated by the Purge updates, fatalities, and the Sacred Hunt event. However, buried in the patch notes are some new destructible forts on the Isle of Siptah. These seem pretty interesting, so no time to waste, let's dive into the new camps. Firstly, the Forlorn Stygian camp at New Luxor in map square M11. This camp is right in the courtyard of the ruins, and given its size, it's pretty much impossible to miss. Built from insulated wood, the first thing you'll of course notice is that it's much smaller than the fortress of Al-Moriah on the Exile lands, which is quite good as performance around both of these Siptah forts is notably better than at Al-Moriah. You'll also notice the quite unusual construction. It looks messy in a way on the exterior, but actually makes quite a lot of sense on the interior. There's a good amount of space and a few different levels inside, but just in terms of structure, the base is really interesting to look at and play through. In terms of actually fighting in the camp, it was quite an enjoyable experience. I went in solo with a strength build, and generally just tried to brute force my way through the front door up to the final boss room. Of course you could approach this however you like, you could quite easily bomb through the roof of the boss room, kill him and get out. If you take my approach, you do get swarmed quite a lot by undead soldiers and spiders, though it wasn't too difficult. I imagine this raid is designed for a reasonably high level range, but overall, given that I was using some pretty good gear, it didn't feel impossible or insurmountable at any point. That being said, this camp definitely does feel like the hardest out of the two, though there isn't a whole wealth of difference between them in terms of difficulty. Getting through the doors and gates is made easier as, like Al-Moriah, they have reduced health. There's a lot of loot around this camp, so it's worth exploring and looking through the rooms. The enemy spawning also feels a lot smoother than Al-Moriah. I'm not too sure if it spawns in waves or if it's different, but it does feel a lot more structured and rhythmic. You fight a bunch of enemies, get a chance to recover and explore a bit, encounter more enemies and repeat. To finish off the raid, you'll have to reach the uppermost room and kill a 3-skull wight with around 5,000 health, which isn't a terribly difficult fight, but you do have to respect the boss's range as the room you fight him in is fairly narrow in parts. It's also worth noting here that for both bases it's similar to Al-Moriah in that the base will regenerate its structures and all the enemies after the boss has been defeated as long as no players are around. Having played through this camp solo, all things considered, I think it's really good. It was interesting to besiege and play with, and the enemy tempo was good, and even the loot itself was pretty impressive. Here's a sample of the loot I got from a run where I just looted all the enemies and most of the chests. There's a good amount of quite useful resources, though I will say the interactable weapons around the camp are around steel or iron tier, which seems a little low. I think I would have preferred steel and hardened steel. It's also worth noting that unlike Al-Moriah, I couldn't seem to find any explosive jars or battering rams in the yard, so you will have to come prepared. Overall, the siege at New Luxor felt pretty good. Performance was much better than Al-Moriah, it felt dynamic and interesting, I was rewarded for exploring the base, and ultimately, I think the entire experience is worth your time. However, of course, this is only one of 2 new raids, so let's head all the way to the other side of the map. The second new camp is the Remnants of Ixotel over in map square C9. This camp is built on a ridge above the main thoroughfare of the ancient city, and as you've already seen, it's dark, like painfully dark. It's built from black ice, which just adds to the darkness, and contains undead enemies much like those in the New Luxor camp. This fort is perhaps even stranger in construction than its New Luxor counterpart, almost labyrinth-like in some areas. This does make the base a bit hard to navigate at points, but not impossible. There are good exterior platforms from which you can work out roughly where to head next. In terms of actually taking on the camp, it's not too bad at all. Whilst the structure is very unusual, it actually helps a lot to break up the enemies so you're not fighting loads of them at once. Archers are very dominant in certain areas, but given the camp is so close to the walls of Ixotel, you can quite easily just climb up, drop down onto the ramparts and clear the archers. My one major complaint here is the lighting. As you can see, I pretty much fight this entire camp with a mace or a sword in my main hand and a torch in my offhand, and that is for good reason. The entire contrast level of the area is incredibly low, given the atmosphere of Ixotel and the Black Ice base, and there just is not enough lighting. If they added some torches in, I think this camp would be vastly improved by that, and you probably don't need too many, just a few. Whilst the base can be very confusing to navigate at times, it is most definitely worth exploring. There are a lot of chests scattered throughout the base itself and in the surrounding grounds, and while some of the loot is not as desirable, there's plenty of other interesting and useful things to find. Working your way through the exterior ramparts and catwalks is quite a unique experience, and when you reach the uppermost room, it's much like New Luxor in that you have to defeat a 3-skull wight to finish off the base. The siege on Ixotel does feel a little easier than the New Luxor camp, but not significantly so, and I think the base design makes it feel quite interesting to explore and conquer, even if it can get a little confusing at times. This is a sample of the loot I managed to get, quite the variety of items, so you'll definitely find some useful things here. Ultimately, I think this camp is also quite good, even if it does have one or two issues. Learning to navigate it is honestly just something that comes with experience, a few runs and I doubt anyone will have any major navigational issues. The lighting is unfortunately pretty bad. I cranked my gamma up a bit and a torch did help a lot, but I would love to have some extra lighting around the base just to save us from that bit of eye strain. All in all, I think both of the new camps on Siptah are pretty good. I liked Al Moriah for what it was trying to be, but it's no secret performance around and inside the fortress was not great. If this is the alternative to porting Al Moriah over to Siptah, I think it's actually a really good trade-off, and in some areas, dare I say it actually feels better to play through. The loot is varied and interesting, you're rewarded for exploring the bases, and whilst, don't get me wrong, they're not the most difficult encounters in the world, I think they are ultimately pretty good. And there we have it, the 2 new camps over on the Isle of Siptah. Thanks for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. I found myself pleasantly surprised by these camps. They might not be as spectacular as Al Moriah, but what they lose in spectacle, I think they gain in fun, practicality and reward. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.